For decades, the voice of Neil Diamond echoed through packed arenas like a heartbeat the world could never forget. The songs were triumphant. The crowds were electric. The applause felt endless. But behind that unmistakable voice, behind the glittering stage lights and sold-out concerts, was a man quietly fighting battles almost nobody truly understood. Because the real story of Neil Diamond was never just about fame. It was about loneliness. It was about sacrifice. And in the end, it became a story about watching one of music's most powerful performers slowly lose the very thing that gave his life meaning. Today, at 85 years old, the tragedy surrounding Neil Diamond feels almost impossible to ignore. Not because the world stopped loving him, but because time eventually came for a man who once seemed larger than life itself. And perhaps that's what makes his story so heartbreaking. The man who spent decades making millions feel alive would one day face silence in ways even his fans could never imagine. But long before the illness, long before the farewell tours and emotional goodbyes, there was just a shy boy from Brooklyn trying to survive a world that often made him feel invisible. Neil Diamond was born in New York City in 1941 and raised in Brooklyn during a time when America itself was changing rapidly. His childhood was far from glamorous. His family struggled financially, and emotional stability was often hard to find. There was no sign that this quiet young boy would eventually become one of the best-selling musicians in history. In fact, much of Neil's early life was marked by uncertainty. He wasn't the loudest kid in the room. He wasn't naturally confident. And he certainly didn't look like a future superstar. But what he did have was a deep emotional sensitivity, the kind that often creates artists capable of touching millions. Music became his escape long before it became his career. While other kids chased attention, Neil disappeared into melodies, lyrics, and emotion. He found comfort in songs because songs didn't judge him. They didn't abandon him. They didn't demand he become someone else. And that quiet emotional dependence on music would shape the rest of his life. But what fans didn't realize was that even during those early years, Neil was already becoming familiar with loneliness. There was always a feeling that he was searching for something. Approval, connection, identity, maybe all three. As he got older, that hunger only intensified. In college, Neil briefly studied medicine and even considered becoming a doctor. It was the safer path, the stable path, the kind of future families dreamed about. But music kept pulling him back. Not because it promised fame, because it gave him purpose. And eventually, he made the terrifying decision to chase songwriting full-time, a decision that could have easily destroyed his future. At first, the struggle was brutal. Neil wrote songs during the day and survived however he could at night. He wasn't performing in giant arenas yet. He was writing for other artists, sitting in cramped offices, hoping someone in the industry might notice his talent. The rejection was constant. The uncertainty was crushing. And yet, he kept writing. Because deep down, Neil Diamond wasn't just trying to become successful. He was trying to prove that his voice mattered. Then slowly, everything began to change. By the mid-1960s, his songwriting talent was becoming impossible to ignore. He wrote "I'm a Believer" for the Monkees, and the song exploded into a massive hit. Suddenly, the industry saw him differently. The quiet songwriter from Brooklyn was no longer invisible. He had arrived. But success came with a hidden cost. Because the more recognition Neil received, the more pressure began to consume him. He wasn't just writing songs anymore. He was carrying expectations. And for emotionally sensitive artists, expectations can become a prison. As his own performing career took off with songs like Cherry, Cherry, Sweet Caroline, and Cracklin' Rosie, Neil Diamond transformed into a global phenomenon. Audiences adored him. Women screamed for him. Concert venues filled instantly. On stage, he looked unstoppable, charismatic, powerful, completely in control. But behind the spotlight, another reality was quietly forming. Fame didn't erase Neil's insecurities. If anything, it magnified them. The more famous he became, the harder it became to separate Neil Diamond the performer from Neil Diamond the human being. And that emotional split would haunt him for decades. Because every night, he walked onto stages filled with tens of thousands of people, then walked back into hotel rooms filled with silence. What fans saw was energy. What Neil often felt was exhaustion. And the deeper his fame grew, the more isolated he quietly became. There's something deeply tragic about entertainers whose entire lives revolve around making other people happy while privately falling apart themselves. And Neil Diamond was beginning to live inside that contradiction. The world saw confidence, but internally, he wrestled with fear, emotional pressure, and the crushing responsibility of constantly delivering perfection. He became addicted to performance in some ways, not because he loved attention, but because the applause temporarily silenced the loneliness. And that's when the cycle truly began. More fame, more touring, more pressure, more emotional distance from real life. By the 1970s, Neil Diamond wasn't just a singer anymore. He was becoming an icon. But icons rarely get to live normal lives. The schedules became relentless. The expectations became impossible. And the emotional cracks behind the scenes were growing larger with every passing year. What fans didn't realize was that the very success that made Neil Diamond legendary was also slowly consuming the man underneath it all. And the real tragedy, however, was still years away. Because eventually, the loneliness, pressure, and emotional sacrifices of fame would begin destroying the parts of Neil Diamond that no audience ever got to see. And once that happened, nothing would ever feel the same again. By the late 1970s, Neil Diamond was no longer simply a successful musician. He had become something far bigger, a cultural force. His concerts felt almost religious. Tens of thousands of fans sang every lyric back to him as if his music had become stitched into the fabric of their lives. Songs like Sweet Caroline transformed into emotional rituals. Entire arenas moved together when he performed. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate dream. Money, fame, admiration, immortality. But behind the roaring crowds and standing ovations, Neil Diamond was beginning to disappear inside the machine he had built. Because fame has a cruel way of trapping people inside the version of themselves the world wants to keep forever. And for Neil, the pressure became relentless. Every performance had to be bigger. Every album had to succeed. Every tour had to prove he still mattered. The music industry can be merciless to artists as they age. One wrong album, one weak performance, one quiet year, and suddenly the world starts treating legends like memories. Neil understood that fear deeply, and it pushed him harder than almost anyone realized. What fans saw was confidence. What Neil often carried was emotional exhaustion. Night after night, he stepped onto stages glowing under blinding lights, pouring every ounce of himself into performances that demanded enormous emotional energy. But when the music stopped, there was often nothing waiting for him except silence. That contrast slowly began taking a psychological toll. Because there's a devastating loneliness that can come from spending your life surrounded by millions of people, while still feeling emotionally unreachable. And Neil Diamond knew that feeling intimately. The real tragedy was that success didn't heal the emotional wounds he carried from earlier in life. It simply covered them with applause. But applause fades. And when it does, people are often left alone with the parts of themselves they spent years trying to outrun. What fans didn't fully realize was how deeply Neil struggled with identity outside of performing. On stage, he was magnetic. Off stage, he often seemed restless, searching for peace he could never quite hold on to. Relationships became increasingly complicated. Love, for someone living under constant pressure and public attention, can become painfully fragile. Neil experienced marriages, heartbreaks, and emotional distance that reflected the hidden instability fame often creates. His first marriage ended. Then another relationship collapsed under the weight of celebrity life. And each heartbreak seemed to leave deeper emotional scars behind. Because for all the wealth and success surrounding him, Neil Diamond often appeared to be chasing something profoundly human. A sense of belonging. Someone who loved Neil the man, not just Neil Diamond the legend. But maintaining intimacy becomes extraordinarily difficult when your life is consumed by touring, recording, interviews, expectations, and the emotional demands of entertaining millions. And slowly, the cracks became harder to ignore. During the height of his fame, Neil admitted to battling severe emotional struggles, including depression and profound self-doubt. There were periods where the pressure became so overwhelming that he sought therapy in an attempt to understand the emotional turmoil living beneath the surface. That revelation shocked many fans. Because how could someone so adored feel so lost? But that's often the hidden reality of fame. The world sees applause. The artist feels isolation. And that contradiction haunted Neil Diamond for years. There were moments where he openly questioned his own happiness despite having achieved almost everything imaginable. He had the success people dream about, yet internally, something still felt incomplete. And that's when everything began to change in ways that would quietly redefine his life forever. As the decades passed, Neil continued performing with astonishing intensity. Even as younger artists dominated the charts, he remained one of the most beloved live performers in the world. But aging in public is brutal, especially for performers whose identities are built around energy, charisma, and commanding massive stages. Every year brought new physical demands. Long tours became harder. Recovery became slower. Fatigue lingered longer than before. Though, Neil kept going, because performing wasn't just his career anymore. It had become his emotional lifeline. The stage was where he felt most alive, most needed, most understood. And perhaps that's why what happened next became so devastating. Because the one thing Neil Diamond could always rely on, the thing that gave his life rhythm and meaning, would eventually begin slipping away from him piece by piece. But before the public fully understood what was happening, there were already signs. Subtle moments. Changes in movement. Changes in energy. A quiet physical struggle hidden beneath the professionalism of a legendary entertainer refusing to slow down. Most fans didn't notice at first. Neil was too experienced, too disciplined, too proud to let the audience see weakness. He kept smiling, kept singing, kept performing. But privately, the fear was growing. And somewhere deep down, Neil likely understood that something irreversible was beginning. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. After spending a lifetime outrunning loneliness through music, he was now approaching a battle music alone could not protect him from. And the real heartbreak was not just the illness itself. It was what the illness threatened to take away. His freedom, his independence, his identity. Because for Neil Diamond, performing was never just something he did. It was who he was. And soon, the world would witness one of the most emotional farewells in music history. A farewell that transformed celebration into grief almost overnight. The legendary performer who once electrified stadiums with unstoppable energy was about to face the most painful chapter of his life. And for millions of fans who grew up with his voice, it felt almost impossible to accept. In January of 2018, the world of Neil Diamond changed forever. At first, fans thought it was just another tour announcement. Another scheduling update. Another routine message from a legendary artist preparing for the next chapter of live performances. But then came the devastating truth. Neil Diamond revealed that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And almost instantly, everything stopped. The concerts, the touring, the future he had spent his entire life building around the stage. Gone. For millions of fans around the world, the news felt deeply personal. Neil Diamond wasn't just another celebrity. His music had lived inside weddings, road trips, heartbreaks, family gatherings, and moments people carried for decades. His voice had become part of people's memories. And now, suddenly, the man who once seemed unstoppable was facing an illness that slowly steals control from the human body itself. But behind the public announcement was an even more heartbreaking reality. Neil Diamond was forced to confront something terrifying. The possibility that he could no longer be Neil Diamond in the way he had always understood himself. Because Parkinson's disease didn't just threaten his health. It threatened his identity. The diagnosis came just before the Australian leg of his 50th anniversary tour. A tour meant to celebrate a lifetime of music and endurance. Instead, it became a painful farewell. Fans were devastated. Many couldn't believe it. Others held on to hope that somehow he would recover and return to the stage once more. But deep down, there was a painful understanding settling over everyone. This was the end of an era. And perhaps the saddest part of all was how suddenly it happened. One moment, Neil Diamond was still standing before massive audiences, singing songs that made entire arenas feel alive. The next, he was saying goodbye to the only life he had ever truly known. But behind the spotlight, the emotional toll was even greater than the public realized. Because retirement for most people means rest. For performers like Neil Diamond, retirement can feel like losing a piece of the soul itself. The stage had been his sanctuary for decades. It gave structure to his life, meaning to his pain, connection to the world. Without it, silence became impossible to escape. What fans didn't realize was how emotionally brutal that transition can be for aging performers. The crowds disappear. The adrenaline fades. The routine vanishes. And suddenly, a person who spent their entire life being needed by millions is left alone with time, illness, and reflection. And reflection can be dangerous, especially when your entire identity was built around movement, performance, and purpose. Neil tried to remain optimistic publicly. He thanked fans repeatedly. He expressed gratitude for the love he had received throughout his career. And even after retiring from touring, he occasionally appeared in public, sometimes singing unexpectedly during special moments that left audiences emotional. But those appearances carried a different feeling now. The energy had changed. People weren't just watching a legendary musician anymore. They were watching time itself. And that realization was heartbreaking. There's something uniquely painful about seeing artists who once commanded gigantic stages slowly become physically fragile. Fans remember the younger version forever. The powerful voice, the confidence, the unstoppable presence. But aging doesn't care about legacy. Illness doesn't care about fame. And Parkinson's disease certainly doesn't care about applause. As the years passed, images of Neil became increasingly emotional for longtime fans. The once tireless performer now moved more carefully, more slowly, sometimes appearing visibly exhausted. Yet despite everything, there remained a quiet dignity about him. That may be what makes his story so deeply human. Neil Diamond never became bitter publicly. He never lashed out at fans, never turned cruel or cynical. Even while facing one of the most painful transitions imaginable, he continued expressing appreciation for the audience that stayed with him for generations. But beneath that grace, there was undeniable sadness. Because no matter how much love surrounded him, there was still a heartbreaking truth nobody could escape. The man who once lived for the stage could never fully return to it again. And for someone whose voice carried entire lifetimes of emotion, that loss feels almost unbearable. The tragedy of Neil Diamond is not simply that he grew old. Everyone grows old. The tragedy is the contrast. The contrast between the electrifying performer frozen forever in millions of memories, and the aging man quietly facing illness away from the spotlight. It's the contrast between the thunderous applause of packed arenas and the silence that follows when the lights finally go dark. And perhaps that's why his story affects people so deeply. Because Neil Diamond represents something larger than music. He represents time. He represents the painful reality that even the brightest stars eventually dim. Even legends become vulnerable. Even voices that once felt immortal can begin to fade. Yet somehow, his music still survives all of it. Sweet Caroline still echoes through stadiums. People still sing along without hesitation. Entire generations still feel emotionally connected to songs created decades ago. And in that way, part of Neil Diamond never truly disappeared. Even now, long after the touring stopped, his voice continues traveling through memories, speakers, and crowded rooms filled with people who may not even fully realize how much emotion lives inside those songs. That's the bittersweet beauty of artists like Neil Diamond. The man grows older. The body weakens. The spotlight fades. But the music keeps breathing. And maybe that's what makes this story feel so haunting in the end. Because somewhere behind all the fame, awards, and legendary performances was simply a man searching for connection through music his entire life. A man who gave the world joy while quietly carrying loneliness of his own. A man who spent decades making audiences feel less alone, only to eventually face one of life's cruelest battles himself. And as time continues moving forward, one heartbreaking truth becomes impossible to ignore. The world may always remember the legend standing beneath the lights. But somewhere behind those memories is an aging man who once gave everything he had to the stage, and then had to learn how to live without it.